Hi, my name is Griffin. I'm from the Institute for American Indian Studies. I'm an educator there and designer there. We are doing an at-home series of videos to put online, and I am doing one on shelter building, and specifically lean-tos and kind of short-term shelter building versus long-term shelter building. This is something that's just kind of useful. As you can tell, this is almost April, and this is what's happening. So you never know when you're going to need shelter. This is something you can do both outside and inside. I'll talk about different ways to do it outside. I'll talk about a few different ways to do it inside if you don't have the space or environment to be able to do it effectively. But this is a type of shelter that has been used in this area, and I'm currently in Connecticut. Used in this area for over 10,000 years. People lived in these exclusively almost up until probably about 3,000 years ago in this area. So this is the type of structure that people would have been living in when they were hunter-gatherer societies and needed to either follow availability of food resources, or I guess also animals would also kind of fit into the availability of food resources. But they'd be following animals or hunting and gathering other materials, berries, nuts, tubers, things that you could just kind of find. So to start, a lot of these structures are, as I said, short term. So these things are not going to be things that are going to be lived in for a very long time. You might only be in them for a night. You might be in them for a week and a half. You might, be in them for anything in between, or maybe a little bit longer, but not too much longer than that. But they're pretty easy to construct, and generally the way that they are constructed, depending on your materials and your environment, are going to be relatively similar. But a lot of the key concepts of each design is going to carry over into the types of materials you have. I'm using base stuff that I can just find on the ground in the woods here. And as we kind of move forward from there, we'll talk about ways that you can incorporate different types of materials that you might have on hand in your house into things like this. So lean-tos are built in this area in kind of one of two ways. They are either freestanding or they're up against an object. A lot of times in this area, you'll find rock shelters, things that are leaned up against stones. This is probably pretty small in terms of what you'd find for things to be built up against. A lot of times you'll see rock shelters where you might even have to build anything because it overhangs enough that you can get under there. But if you can't, building something up against it is going to be relatively easy. Even this size, as you can tell here, you can build something that is large enough that you can get in relatively easily. Now, I only worked on this for about, the 3 that I'm going to show you. This has been maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, I think, of work after kind of prepping the materials to kind of get everything together. Now, as you can tell, there's probably room in there for like 2 people. You don't want a lot of people in these, and you don't want them to be too big, even if you have a number of people. One of the main concerns that you want is heat retention. You want to be able to make sure that your heat is not escaping. The entrance area for this one here is actually pretty large. If you really are concerned about heat, you're going to want a little tiny hole, and you can start a fire probably near the entrance. You don't want it inside because smoke inhalation is not going to be good for you. And on top of that, you don't want the thing you just built catching fire. A lot of this stuff is flammable. In order to build these, even if you aren't going to build off of a stable structure, you're going to need a framework to build from. The main framework, you can think of it like a spine and rib cage. The one that I have here kind of shows you the way that it's started. It has a spine, basically, for this one here, of a main pole, and then there's ribs kind of built off of that. These main pieces are going to be the major support network for everything you're putting on top of it. When you are putting these up, you want to make sure that you're getting as much stability as possible. You're going to kind of weave them together. Once you have more of the basic pieces, there's lattice that you're going to want to weave in underneath that. Lattice is just kind of a fancy term for smaller stuff. Stuff like this, if I can hold it against the snow, maybe you can see it a little bit more easily. Stuff that has lots of little tiny bits. Those little tiny pieces, whether they're needles from a tree or whether they are just small twigs from a larger branch, will provide as like kind of extra support for anything you put on top. And in the case of what we're doing here, our final layer is leaves. Now, you can use final layers of sod. Some people will use moss. You could use bark. There's lots of different things that you can do in order to have that final layer on, because the final layer is basically to help kind of keep the elements off and retain the heat. But For all of those, you're still going to need some kind of lattice to keep from caving in. So the way that the lattice will work is you can break it up into smaller pieces and kind of weave it in. You'll take it and kind of work it in between stuff. And working it in will kind of cross up and kind of create layers that aren't just parallel with all the other ones that are in there. These can kind of go perpendicular because you can weave back and forth, same way you'd weave a basket. Once you have enough of that built up, you can start putting on your final layers on top. Now, this is a quick amount of layers here. You could probably go even deeper with this, of a cover on it. If you get up inside, you can probably still see little bits of light coming through. And the less light you can see, the better. But over time, all these layers will compact a little bit. And as I said, this isn't meant to be a very long-standing structure. This isn't meant for something that you're going to be in for, years. This is a very quick type of structure. But it's still, even in the course of 2 rains or a snow or things like that, the layers will compact, and that will actually help with the retention. But if you don't have enough of the support network in there, stuff will start to fall through from between in the gaps. So you have to make sure that there's enough around there to be able to support all the weight that you put on top of it. The final one that I have over here that I wanted to show is this, and this is totally freestanding. Now this is a wiki-up. This is just the main kind of spine of it, and it's freestanding because it holds itself up. You get enough legs of it, and then you build off of that. You'll build off of this the same way that you'll build off of the one over there that I showed you before. You'll have a whole bunch of verticals that'll all start to build up, and then you'll start weaving in between. Now this isn't used in this area as much. If you're looking at history of this area, this is used actually more out west, even closer to kind of Nevada area. This, as you can tell, is pretty tall. I could stand up in this when it was done, and kind of, I have to crouch a little bit, but I'm actually pretty tall too, so. This normally in this area wouldn't be the way they do it anyways, because heat rises. So all of your warm air would go up here while you were trying to stay in here. Out west, this is actually really important that it does that, because they're trying to avoid the sun a lot of times. They're not trying to protect themselves from rain or snow or things like that. They're more trying to protect themselves from the sun. So they'll build something that protects them from the heat, and the heat can rise away from them and they can stay low. But the same kind of idea would be used for building something like that as would be used for building this type of shelter as well. Now, this is all stuff that you can do outside or in the house too. As I said, you can use different types of materials. This is going to depend on what types of materials you have available. And it's just a good skill to have anyways. You can practice it making really, really crazy large fun ones. As I said, those are less useful for the purpose of it, but it doesn't mean it's not fun to do, and it does mean that it will actually give you skills in kind of understanding the structure and what can take weight and what can't take weight, so the kind of architecture idea of it's going to be kind of fun to play with as well. So you can start swapping out, these are baseline materials, you can start swapping out things and saying, okay, well, what if I have PVC pipe? What can I do with PVC pipe? What can I do if I have tarps? What can I do if I have, and you can start to kind of adapt this and change it. If you have something that's like clear plastic, you can actually turn it into a greenhouse, which allows the sunlight to come in and then traps the sunlight and bounces the sunlight around inside, and it'll get even warmer. You can even put a fire on the other side of that and then generate heat that way and trap that heat behind the plastic. Now granted, you don't want the plastic to be that close to it, but there's new age materials you can add into this and see how that affects the kind of qualities that this type of shelter has. If you have only a space inside to practice this on, use anything you have in the house. You can just pile stuff up, and the kind of skill in doing this a lot of times is figuring out how to get things to balance and how to get things to hold up things you put over them. A good way to test to see whether or not it's going to retain heat is if you can shine a flashlight from the inside and you can't see any of the light on the outside. If you have 2 people, so you can have somebody spotting and somebody shining it, it means that you're going to get pretty good heat retention. But of course, the more layers you put on, the more heat retention you're going to get. So another thing to consider, right now in this part of New England, we don't really have to worry about too many natural hazards outside. I mean, maybe other than ticks, which, I mean, this is kind of not a day that ticks would really want to be out, but you never know. If you live in a different part of the country and you don't know what type of environmental hazards are around, make sure to check in. There's probably plenty of resources online, nature centers and things like that, to check out and see if there's any flora or fauna that you should be aware of before you start building something like this and you start digging up piles of leaves and flipping over logs and things. Make sure that you know what hazards are available there. One final thing, if you are building one of these types of shelters inside, if you are not using LED bulbs, remember these maintain heat. If you forget to turn off a light or something like that, it can be a fire hazard, so make sure that you are cautious when you are breaking down or finishing. Don't leave any lights on or burn anything down. Otherwise, you might need to have this kind of skill. So, anyways, thanks for hanging out. Hope you guys learned something. Hope you guys have fun.